Okay, so it's like April 2019. Um, we are just on, what's it? We've just passed the 20th anniversary of the release of The Matrix. That happened a couple days ago, which is freaking probably the most important movie, I think, science fiction movie, you know.
Wow.
I think it's like the archetype for the modern sci-fi movie and superhero movie and all those things. They're all taking notes from Wachowski brothers, like the way that the visual storytelling changed.
Yeah.
And then the use of hyper realistic action sequencing to do the visual storytelling too. That's like even James Cameron started taking notes from the Matrix playbook.
Well, it's funny because I just read a critique that was saying that The Matrix is, upon retroactive viewing, nothing but an inflated male power fantasy.
Really?
And at first I was like, seems like a really absurd critique, but when you really read into it, it's like, wow, it's pretty accurate and on point, because when you think about it and think about the character of Neo, like all of the things that his character represents, it's like he was an average cubicle worker at the beginning who basically we kind of get a sense of him looking for Morpheus, but we didn't really get a sense that
he didn't know what he was looking for.
Yeah, so it's like he kind of stumbles into greatness by accident.
Yeah.
And then
because he's the one.
Downloads kung fu. He never has to put a day of effort into it. And then you look at the only minority and female characters are there to reinforce him, like his identity and making sure that he's confident. And it's like, wow, when you kind of really break it down, it is that it's hard not to then look at that critique as painting the whole thing, because we analyzed it I think even in the context of, at the time, having the Wachowski brothers as still being brothers and not the Wachowski sisters.
Well, so I recently read a critique of the Matrix as this like a transhuman story about the way that we present ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently in the original manuscript for the Matrix, the Switch character is a dude in the real world. And presents as female in the Matrix, because that was this thing that happened back in the day in message boards or in
right.
chat rooms. Someone would be presented
they did that
as,
in Ready Player One.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, someone presents as female, but they're really just some dude, or someone's a dude and they're really female. And it's like, that was a thing back then.
Right, yeah.
And so
yeah.
that they weren't able to, apparently they weren't able to integrate that because studios probably, but
which again, it's like
there's this whole apparently this idea that the story is a way of breaking through some kind of shell.
Mm-hmm.
and finding individuality and
which
all
a lot of people accuse Matrix of just stealing Ghost in the Shell story.
Well, of course.
That's where.
But they were like, I mean, obviously the Wachowski sisters are avid anime fans. Like,
right? Yeah,
I mean, they made Speed Racer.
Yeah,
that's like everyone's first kiss with anime as far.
Well, they made. I mean, not they, but they commissioned Animatrix.
That's right.
So
yeah,
it's not like they weren't moving towards anime.
They were already
in their universe.
Yeah, and the Matrix is this grand, you know, film noir, mod, high fashion, like I think the way that they described it in this whole like reflection of trans culture was that like they're by the time that they're like they fully realized who Neo is, they're going out in like fetish gear.
Right.
It's like, whoa. It didn't occur to me though, because like to me it was always this kind of like a joke that was most succinct in the movie Grandma's Boy, when one of the characters makes fun of JP and says, "Hey JP, how much do clothes cost in the Matrix?" He's standing in front of a Matrix poster, and he like looks like he's part of the poster. Is the sight gag, but that's kind of the thing. It's like that's a costume now.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, it was a costume then too, but it's really a costume now.
Oh yeah.
And it's like the same way as dressing up like a cowboy.
Well, they made their own universe, and it was never meant to be a realistic vision of this universe in a way that them embracing that style, obviously, even down to the phones, people were at the time, I want one of those Matrix phones, but then it didn't last.
No.
But for a second, everybody was like,
Nokia reintroduced a Matrix phone. They did, like a couple of years ago, or a year or two ago, maybe.
Yeah.
I read about it. I thought I was like, that's actually kind of cool, like because it had the whole slide out popping thing function.
Which that slide out function is totally pointless.
Yeah,
it's just something that can break, and when you think about it, it's like it just really it was one of those effects where you're looking at it, and when it happens, you're like, oh my god, that's so cool. But then you're like, this does nothing extra. This absolutely does nothing. So for them to do it was obviously stylized, and that's when, once you have time to think about it, it's like, you step back from it and you're like, oh.
I always thought the idea of like an extendable antenna on a cell phone is like, really? Is that really gonna help? Because it only
it's 8 feet long.
It only helps with directionality, and it has to be like a certain length to meet a wavelength requirement.
Right,
so is it even long enough to meet the wavelength requirement? Is that because if it is, then holy crap, what kind of wavelengths are they sending at me, and like what's this thing doing to me?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole crux of the
5G spectrum.
Well, that and
cell phone technology back then.
Yeah, well, this is the notion of people who've gotten cancer from cell phones, and the idea that the waves in the air are modifying people's behavior, and even down to the radio waves being frequency modification of people, like on a cellular level. And that's kind of one of those things where I used to hear about it in conspiracy culture, and then when you see things like all these birds just dying in the thousands when they start falling out of the sky and all this shit was happening, nobody could really give an explanation. But now we didn't really understand our fucking cell phone spectrums then.
So when I was in high school, I read a white paper about I think Sony backed it, the research, where they were able to use radio or sound wave information, encoding data in it somehow, and people were able to glean information from the transmission. So they were able to basically beam in ideas with sound.
Yeah.
So I think it's completely reasonable that a bunch of birds might run into some kind of sonic wall or electromagnetic wall, and especially birds, because they've got a really they've got a magnetic compass system that's dialed into the planet. And somehow some kind of seasonal, maybe that's just a light thing though.
Well, I'm sure it's magnetic.
Yeah.
Because now we know humans can actually sense the magnetic field of the Earth as well, and it just, for the longest time they thought we couldn't, and it's like
yeah. No, they're just really moody. No, they're being cooked by some kind of magnetic storm that most people don't feel. They're just sensitive. They really are sensitive.
And it's funny because now I'll I try to be sensitive to shit, and then I'll be on days where I'm like, I feel off. I'll go check the space weather, and it's like, is there geomagnetic storm or some shit?
Is the sun freaking out?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think it's funny when people are of the mind where you're like, okay, if the sun can affect our entire climate, why would it not be able to affect an individual? And it's like, I don't want to make it that binary, but it's more so people want to make it as if we're immune from
I think if the sun, over the course of one generation, can change the complexion, eye color, and hair of offspring by changing geographic location, so latitude and even in longitude.
Yeah, it's really exposure to the sun.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. If exposure to the sun, by changing your location and staying there and reproducing of that, and just that location change alters the outcome, so that offspring will have different skin and hair features and eye features because of the latitude and longitude change, and that's.
Yeah, evolution is really a function of exposure to the sun.
Yeah, like
at the core.
I think that's one of those things that
even down to the mutations.
Exactly.
It's like the mutations probably are happening because the cells are being bombarded by fucking photons or some sort of nuclear,
some kind of activity. Yeah, something's going on.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's again where I'm like.
No, but maybe that's what our bodies are. That's how humans are supposed to. What is supposed to happen with human genetics? We're supposed to respond like that.
Yep.
So, I mean, and if you stay alone long enough, eventually those changes stay. Although I imagine. I
mean, they change like
with successive generations. So.
Even within a generation, if you go to space.
Yeah.
And
that really changed. Well,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
There's some serious radiation exposure going on in space, though.
And it alters your DNA. Now we know definitively that with the twins testing that it does alter your DNA.
And then there's also the whole they're going to get cancer. They will their exposure. You can only go into space for so long because we don't have the shielding technology yet to sustain.
Or our DNA hasn't modified itself yet.
Oh, man.
Or evolved to accommodate for that, which, well, maybe we just don't know because we're only sending, a very select few population out there.
I really think it'd be awesome if we could, make CRISPR a car wash. So you go in and you put your feet in some strappy things, and you're wearing sandals, so they just kind of suction cup in place, and then has a bar. It says hold here. You grab a hold of it, and it just goes you through it. It sprays you down with some kind of solution, and then maybe they electrocute you, and that's how they transmit the code to turn things on or off. And then maybe that's how they, it's like engage radiation resiliency factor.
Well, because I'm of the mind. Once we get to that point, then why do we need to have children? If somebody can live to 1,000 years old, we get to a real existential crisis of is it ethical to keep having children if people are living to 1,000 years old? And then it's what happens when because then it's if everyone has access to the capacity to modify their own genes to be okay, now I'm living to 1,000 or whatever, even immortal. Let's just say immortal.
Well, I think the first question is, the first requirement is somebody has to be psychologically stable, because I think that one of those things that they explore in Like,
But who decides that then? You know what I mean?
No, I mean, they do, because, you know, I mean, hopefully you don't become like some murdering, you know, immortal who goes around killing people, right?
But that's what I'm saying.
That's a potential outcome,
exactly.
Of course.
So,
but that's one of those things they explored in like vampire literature, is that, you know, here's this bloodsucker who has to kill people, and they ultimately end up killing everyone they know. That's like kind of the curse of the vampire. They get to live forever, but they have to kill the people closest to them. And so
they don't, though.
Well, they don't.
It's a choice. That's
choice.
Why when we're looking at vampires, it's an egotistical sociopathic group. It's never meant to be somebody we're supposed to empathize with, which is why these like you know, glittery fucking vampires. It's like, you missed the fucking point.
Of course.
You know what I mean? Well, no. I'm not saying there's an entire generation who got a misrepresentation of vampires, which didn't show all it took out all the bad things.
These are the same group of people who think that the Joker and Harley Quinn have a good relationship. That they actually love each other, when it's like truly
here let's discuss another thing real quick while we're on the issue of like misunderstood comic book people. Batman is a psychopath.
Oh, hell
yeah. He always was a psychopath. Anybody who allows a child to fight crime alongside an adult man in the street is a psychopath. So even down to like, if we're looking at Batman 66 and the Adam West edition, you might as well interpret that as a fucking Adam West, like, well, Bruce Wayne, fucking Dick Grayson LSD trip, as if fucking Batman dosed up this kid and had him out there fighting crime on LSD. They're both on LSD. That's a more rational interpretation of what they were doing than Batman being a sane person. He's always been
that rubber shark on that helicopter.
Right, like, dude, and that's where I mean, like, there's a bunch of people who are out here trying to like knock Zack Snyder for having a Batman that killed. Not only did the first Batman carry guns and kill, it was something that was like, it only came in the, I think, the 70s or 80s, where it was like code. So, or maybe it was like the first 10 years they added the code, but he would go back and forth on it, so it wasn't even a hard code.
I remember when I was little, I remember reading like a Batman origin story, and it was like a Detective Comics thing, and there were guns everywhere, and eventually he would pick up a gun and use it because, you know, he was a man. They hadn't invented all of these martial arts and combat styles to integrate into the Batman storyline. He was a detective, because that's what a badass dude was back then. They were a detective, you know, a hard-boiled, fist-fighting, you know, sometimes gun-toting, maybe a baton if they find one, definitely some brass knuckles when necessary. But they were tough as hell. And I remember seeing a Batman TV show. It was a black and white TV show. It was pre-Adam West, I believe. And they drove a Mercury sedan.
Yeah. It was like one of those. They had those episodic shorts that they were releasing in the theaters.
And he barely had the bat ears, and the cape was really tiny. And he would just fight crime bosses. They hadn't invented the supervillain.
No.
He was just a detective that was. You know,
I mean, Joker was around like from early on, but Joker, it wasn't a supervillain.
No, he was just a crime boss.
Yeah. Well, even the even the early Superman cartoons in the 60s, like, I think one of the villains was like Nikola Tesla or some shit. Yeah. Where you're like, these are, you know, or something where he's using like a Tesla death ray or some shit like that. And these are not Apocalypse or fucking
no. They were gonna use you know, electricity to open up all of the cash registers and do a heist at the grocery store. That's like the level of complexity that they're dealing with. Or they were gonna, you know, steal the safe from the alley by breaking the brick wall with something. You know, that wasn't I don't even think they'd envisioned complex scenarios where, let's do a bank heist, but let's require that not only are they like the best, heist team that exists, they're like the supervillain heist team, and they have the most advanced technology because they're going to go into some vault system that can't even exist yet because we're going to envision the future. Like, they hadn't even gotten that far yet. It was before Batman had technology even. He was still using a Mercury. It had a flathead V8 with like 100 horsepower. That kind of stuff is like, it was a different world. I think it was much more grounded in reality.
Shit.
Which is kind of weird to say. Think of Batman grounded in reality.
Is Magneto technically like the first? Well, yeah, I don't think Red Skull really counts as a supervillain.
No, because he was just a flawed super soldier.
Yeah.
A failed experiment. And I don't want to minimize Red Skull and say he's just a failed super soldier experiment. I mean, that's what he is, but they definitely made Red Skull a whole lot more, way later. I feel like Red Skull was retroactively enhanced to be much more capable than he ever was.
Absolutely.
And then when they throw everything else, when Disney throws their might into it, that's just a different story.
Yeah, huh? I feel like, I'm hard pressed to think of a real supervillain that could qualify as a supervillain that precedes Magneto.
I mean, Magneto is a one-man stop an entire nation.
Well, he could like
destroy
whole planets and shit, right?
He could disintegrate the world if he.
Right, if he wanted to. Yeah. If he totally.
I always tried to imagine like the scariest mortal mutant to me is some kind of combination of Magneto's power with Charles' intellect and Cerebro ability to magnify Charles' intellect and to like see everything, basically.
I think that's Scarlet Witch, basically.
Yeah, essentially.
What you're describing.
And so,
which is what now I think we could segue. I think what they have potentially been doing in the MCU is building Scarlet Witch up to a point where if we see like a Scarlet Witch House of M universe as like a TV show, it would be believable. And it's something where it's like, that's a way I think, if I heard, I know they're doing a Scarlet Witch show, but it's like, I don't know if they've quite made her, they keep alluding to her being that powerful in the oh right, because she was going to destroy the Soul Stone, or the Mind Stone rather. So she had the power. She had the power
to destroy all the stones.
Right.
If she just gets her hands on them
and has enough time.
Yeah.
So that's like, she's gotten to the point, or we've seen her get to the point now, where she's powerful enough to destroy a stone or the stones. So then we might see her get to a point where she's powerful enough to reset the entire, or change the entire universe. If she, like, in the same way when we first saw her and Quicksilver, they were locked up, if she goes crazy and tries to like think she's experiencing the snap or something again and tries to undo it, we see something where she resets the entire universe. They give her House of M, and then we see a full-on House of M storyline where Magneto's like the good guy, and we have fucking Aboriginal Hulk. Like, I think if they did that treatment and had it so that we got a glimpse, all we need is a glimpse of all the shit in the House of M.
Yeah.
You don't need to go the whole storyline of each individual character. So that's kind of where it's like, if they did an 8 episode or 12 episode House of M shit based around her, then people will really understand how powerful she is, then bring her back into the fucking main MCU as like the Scarlet Witch that we know in the comics now, as far as like, I think anybody who's seen her up until now in the, well, because even in the Infinity War battle, Okoye was like, where was that the whole time? Why'd you keep her up there? Like, they finally got to a point where it's like, now we want Scarlet Witch to be on the battlefield, which it took us a long time in the comic books to be, like, when she was like Avengers West Coast and like, you know, Scarlet Witch had to work her way up into the fucking, like, that's what's so cool about the actual comic book, like, West Coast and Midwest Avengers and shit, where you're like, the way they have them set up is, it's like, the people work their way through the ranks, and if you don't fucking work out, you don't ever make it to the main team.
See, I feel like someone like Scarlet Witch with, like, a fully unlocked capability would be able to do things like open up a hole in the Van Allen belt and then, you know, create some kind of lens, atmospheric lens with whatever kind of chemicals are available, really, and focus, like, you know, solar radiation down and create like sunbeams that would, you know, vaporize things.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, that's like, oh yeah, I can do that.
I mean, if you can imagine it, she could do it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like the kind of power that character really
has
the potential for. Yeah.
And they haven't really explored that.
Yeah, no, not at all. She's still doing this wavy hand thing. Like, in my mind, she should be like Magneto, you know, standing still, just like focusing her mind and like occasionally opening her eyes when she gets really mad at something. She's like, "Oh, you just screwed up, buddy. I opened my eyes and I looked at you. You're done."
Yep.
Like, that's like the level of power that she has, and that's actually the level of power that Magneto has, and they just never explore it because
not on
okay, so in the Apocalypse storyline, when, you know, he's like raising hell and all that stuff's flying around, I envisioned that's how I envisioned Magneto actually engaging in hand-to-hand combat when I was in high school. It's like, no, that's all these things that we saw in, like, in the cartoon. It's like, no, that's just like child's play. That's like nothing close to what he can do.
Why would he engage in hand-to-hand combat?
That's the thing. Like, if he ever had to, that's what it looks like in my mind. Like, if somehow the X-Men actually got that close to him, that they had to get that close to him for some reason, and he was unwilling to talk to them, because he was always willing to talk.
No. So did you read?
Up to a point, he was willing to talk, and then after a while, he would like refuse to talk to the professor. And then,
did you read the storyline where he fucking ripped the adamantium out?
Oh yeah.
So that's kind of where it's like
he's done.
It's like when that happened, I read it as a kid. In my head, it cemented like, oh, he's so powerful that he's always like, he could always like just rip people apart because there's hemoglobin, iron in your blood, and he made sure that people understood that. And it's like, I could rip you apart from your blood, but I choose to do this. And then that's when and he's like, I'm gonna make sure that when I rip you apart, that it's only the adamantium. I could pull you apart and pull you apart even more. But
I'm only taking this.
I'm only taking this part, so now this part, the rest of you is intact.
Because like,
and it was like a flash. I was like, oh my god, this is like the most powerful thing in like.
Because the only other person to exist in all of the universe that had the same ability with adamantium is already dead. Because Stryker's already dead at that point. Like, they killed him at that point. They basically turned him into a robot. I thought, like some weird android machine that was basically bent on protecting the Project X facility or killing Wolverine. That's what Stryker became. And at that point he wasn't even human. He was a machine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Magneto's super bad. But that's what I'm saying is, like, they envision it only when he is one of the four horsemen. That's the only time they envisioned him having that kind of power. And in my mind, it's like, no, that's how he fights hand to hand if it ever comes to that, because he's a bad motherfucker. And like, so it's actually, he should be able to do so much more. He actually should be able to rip up the planet apart. He should be able to make it go poof. He should.
Yeah, no, he can.
Like, he should be able to pull the moon closer. He should be able to.
He did. I think There's like.
Well, that's how he lifts his asteroid, but like, he should be able to do so. His character is being very limited by the imagination of people who are writing his stories, I think.
Well, it's not though. He does all that shit in the comics, like, and more in a way where you're like, that's where and now that we have better CGI,
you think they'll be able to deliver this kind of story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like, we'll really be able, like, what we saw in. I don't even know if I finished X3, but what we saw in those. Was not so like the true power of what Magneto. Oh
man, those
like nowhere near.
Ian McKellen is a fine actor, and he did a great job as Gandalf.
Oh yeah, has nothing to do with him, it's the CGI.
But he was too old to be Magneto, and I guess it worked with with Patrick Stewart because Professor X was wheelchair bound at that point, but. I feel like
Fassbender's much better.
Fassbender's an amazing Magneto because he's troubled. He's troubled in a way where I believe it when he lashes out. Whereas when Ian McKellen's Magneto lashes out, it's more like, oh really? Well, look what I can do. Yeah. And I think
I feel like Anthony Hopkins could have pulled that off better.
Yeah, I think Magneto's way more complex than I'm just an old man who got beat up by some Nazis and I'm mad. Like, that was a really limited expression of Magneto. And
very much so.
It was like a disservice to the amount of like torment he's endured.
Yeah. Well, and in the comics, I got much more of a he was basically a god who was trying to be benevolent as long as he possibly could, and him keeping that in check is what drove him crazy, because he was trying to be peaceful, and that's why he was such a complex character to me. I mean, not just to me, but in the sense of whenever him and Charles came to a head, he could have killed Charles so many times, but he never did, because at the end of the day, he had an ideology that he wanted to prove that it was righteous.
Yep.
He wanted to prove that it was righteous.
But he had a breaking point.
He did. He had, and humans pushed him to it all the time.
Yeah.
Because they kept trying to like kill him when he was like, anything that you do isn't gonna work. Every time he'd just be like, you guys can't do shit, and the humans like, oh, we'll build this and that.
We'll be back.
Build Sentinels, like. And it's like,
oh, no. I'll just control your Sentinels.
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing that always interested me about the X-Men universe is that it's a lot more. It's not black and white at all. It's a very broad gray spectrum, where it's very easy for someone's actions to be interpreted as antagonistic or malicious or any of those things. Once you get like halfway into the comic, you realize that the reason they were doing that is because they come from some region that is downstream from some testing facility, and their kids are mutating and or they're being snatched up for experiments, and there's some deeper, darker story behind it.
Yeah. And
it was always more nuanced. Also, I think it's because they created it as kind of like an allegory to explore racial tension. And
well, it's funny because it's like at the time, those things, the way that they were implemented as stories.
Also, all of the PSA X-Men universe characters, like Jubilee as a PSA for fire safety, that shit was fucking...
Yeah.
That was like an insult. That was like worse than G.I. Joe PSA crap at the end of the cartoons.
It's like, it's so funny. Retrospectively, it's so obvious to see what they were doing, but I can't, like... Were people that dumb that they didn't fucking see it at the time? Like, that's what's so crazy to me is like, this is how dumb racist people are, is like, they are so stupid that they did not understand that mutants were supposed to represent the oppressed minorities, and while their kids are out here reading stuff about mutants, they're actually learning to empathize with minorities. And it was like a whole generation of fucking kids who were like subverted into empathy by people who were able to implant this idea by just using a metaphor slightly nuanced enough that the fucking retarded, like, what's the word?
Intellectually stunted?
No, it's like, I still use the word retarded because it's more so like it means a person's slow. Like, I don't use it for actual dumb people, but that's like not the word I meant. It's more so these people were so intellectually perverted by racism that they didn't even see this metaphor layered into.
Well, it was veiled with superpowers and wings and laser beams and claws and these fantastic stories where these people with all these powers, like, you know, did really cool stuff against the man, because, you know, they don't like the man. The man is all about control and authority, and nobody wants that. Everyone's libertarian about that shit, because, you know, that's one of those things that seems to go hand in hand with racism.
Yeah, it's like. And that's the thing. It's like, okay, I feel bad using the word retard in the sense of, I know it offend people, right? But we're talking about actual racist people who thought it was, like, okay to legally oppress people. And right now, we feel bad.
Who also were unable to see the metaphor of X-Men.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. That's what it's like. We are at a point in time where we feel bad using certain words about the worst kind of human beings that did not have any inhibition legally infringing upon people's rights because of skin color. So it's like,
that's actually kind of cool.
That is cool. That's what I'm saying. It's like we've come so far that we're like hesitant to use a word about those people.
Knowing full well that there is absolutely something wrong.
Oh, fuck yeah, like, of course.
That's actually kind of beautiful.
That's where I'm like, how, it's like we're at a point where it's like, okay, everyone should think about what they're saying before they say it so they don't offend somebody on accident. Like, that's not a bad thing. Like, I could have easily just ran with that. I could not have. My thing. Okay, I don't apologize for using the word retard. When it's used correctly.
No, it's a reflection.
It's a word that means slow. Yeah. Like retard, en retard. The word retard means slow. Now, if someone misapplies it to mentally handicapped people, that's when we have to step back and say we can't use that word freely because people misinterpret it. But when I'm like trying to say like this slow thing, or if like, you know what I mean?
That's because there are we describe things. We have a very nuanced language where we can describe somebody as having an intellectual deficit or an intellectual disability or a intellectual incapacity, or it's a very nuanced language that people don't really acknowledge because, you know, you're born in this country, you speak English at a conversational level that's sufficient, but not everyone understands what a pedagogical method is.
Yeah.
That or even what what are some other really fun, like, you know, high level English words, hermeneutics. Or you know, there are some words in English that don't sound like English, but they have very specific meanings, and they point to very, you know, very, very nuanced.
Oh, like things. Mastication.
Yeah, exactly. Metacognition is, you know, that's actually a fairly simple one. Yeah, mastication's a great one.
sounds dirty, but it's not.
We all do it every day.
Everybody masticates.
Almost every time you sit down.
He was masticating. But as far as like.
But yeah, no, it's a nuanced language. We get to, and we should be able to utilize this language. The idea that some words shouldn't be used if they're applied appropriately is, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
we have a very incredibly complex and wonderful language, and it should be like, we should be proud to use this language. It's taken people thousands of years to develop this language.
Yeah.
It can accomplish so much. The Japanese created an entire alphabet to accommodate basically our words. That says a lot. They're Romanizing Chinese so that it appears with characters that you and I will recognize so that we can speak phonetic Chinese. They're Romanizing Chinese. They're doing it to every language because English is, this is probably, English and Chinese are probably, spoken Chinese are probably the languages moving forward. Simply because, population, maybe Indian, or like Hindi, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be China and English. Chinese and English are going to be the languages that make it into space, just because of the numbers and the amount of money and resources and available technology currently.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the Russian space program. I don't even know. Does it even exist? It still exists, right? They're sending tourists into space, though.
No, they were the ones getting us to the space station for a long time.
Okay.
Like, that's why all this bullshit about like Russian tension is like,
I know,
super weird.
It's like, we're mad at the Russians, but we're gonna trust them with our astronauts.
Exactly.
Really?
Exactly.
We're gonna trust them with like the best of the best. Really,
yeah,
bastards.
We were like hitching a ride with them to the space station.
It's like, guys, we don't trust you, so we're gonna sit behind you and we're gonna point our guns at you inside a spaceship.
Yeah. I still don't really understand like why the left wing became anti-Russia. It was as if like that was to me one of those things that I was looking around and I'm like, wait, what the fuck happened? When did we go back to 1985 like fucking hockey film where it all like anti-Russia again, and that's kind of where it came out of. I mean, obviously the collusion, everybody was so hung up on the collusion thing that we drifted back into McCarthyism.
I thought the tension started with Crimea and some Turkish base that they pretended to have Russian munitions in, but it was just cover so that the Americans could blow up some Turkish airbase or something.
Well, that's happening, but nobody on the actual like left wing knows about any of that shit. They don't care because this shit's still affecting Crimea to this day. If they cared about it,
I remember Crimea was actually an issue for a while, and
it was. But I'm saying like, that's been going on for a long time. It didn't just start in 2016.
No, I know.
Or 2014, and it's been. I mean, that's like a decades-long issue.
No, I know, because Crimea is like the nicest place in all of Ukraine.
Right, and so...
and the Russians definitely want it because it's like also one of the nicest parts of Russia or something.
So that's not any... The battle over... Well, the hot and cold aspect go back and forth.
Yeah.
But the Crimea thing is nothing new, but as far as getting to a point where we have people who are on the left wing openly anti-Russia, that used to be the right wing in the like between the 60s and the 80s. And then it became the left wing all of a sudden. That's where I'm like, what the fuck just happened?
No, wait, no. This is another like marker of my bizarro world chart. I read something about like Trump issuing some executive order to ban bump stocks or something. So now the Republicans are banning gun accessories.
Oh,
Like
yeah, what
this
the
is some
fuck?
fucking bizarro world level shit of like max proportion. Like I'm like, and he saved the Special Olympics from his fucking education secretary. Like,
like what the fuck is going on?
no, I'm serious. Like, Bizarro World is in full effect. The Russians are like Maduro's the president of Venezuela, and backing up their military so that their military won't run away from them again like they did that when during
Right.
the fucking parade. and then America is like, get out of the Western Hemisphere, Monroe Doctrine, bitches. And then the Russians are like, well, get out of Syria.
Yeah.
It's a never-ending shitstorm. And of course, all the crazy crap that's happening in Israel right now, where I've been watching a stream from this one guy, and he's just like, they're bombing the place. Everything's on fire. Buildings are just crumbling to the ground, like dead people everywhere in was it Golan Heights?
Yeah, that's what.
And like, well, obviously they're pushing to gain control of the Golan Heights. That's on the border of Syria. Duh. I mean, like, of course there's American interest right there. I feel bad for people in that region who are just there and can't get out, because I imagine to them it seems like a bunch of people fighting over, someone's just coming to take their home away from them.
Pretty much.
And then, but to me, it's like, why the fuck are they fighting over that rocky, arid landscape? Like,
Well, there's a shitload of resources.
well, of course, and it's also like the prettiest, nicest paradise section of the region.
Oh, I mean.
Yeah, like it's one of those things that you have to go looking for. I remember like you showed me some pictures of Africa from one of your trips, and it was like, holy crap, fucking big ass cities and shit. And I've looked at pictures of Israel, and some of it is gorgeous. Some of it looks like Miami. Some of it looks like like freaking downtown. Like holy shit, that's a future level city right there. And of course they want it. It's in a nice spot. They've got beaches. They've got cool arid forest areas and like good fertile farmland, and not untold. I'm pretty sure they've done like all the geological analysis they need to do to know what's in the dirt, but a lot of minerals and oil and everything. So
It's just like
resource rich.
North Korea has like, I think it's like $6 trillion worth of resources that they're sitting on.
Oh yeah. Well,
And nobody ever discusses that when we're like, oh, they're a poor country. Like, well,
I really I feel like any place that is any geographic location that is super resource rich is a potential site for some ancient city of like human city civilization, like a mega city, metropolitan megalopolis, because any place that turns into a strip mine is already a city-sized swath of land, and they tend to
reclaimed like by the earth or something.
Yeah.
It's very possible.
20,000 years
It's
is
very
enough time to turn an entire city into a mountain of steel or of iron and gold and other minerals.
Yeah.
And,
I mean,
there might have been a safe or a jewelry shop, and that's where you're going to find a concentration of diamonds and gemstones.
That's not like an irrational thought at all. Like, that's completely logical that some of these deposits are.
I'm saying like anytime
like the massive ones.
Yeah. And also because anywhere where we find a vein of any kind of petroleum vein at all, a long one. That's like that has to represent some kind of like long-term, you know, accumulation of something. Something has to have accumulated there, some plant life, right?
Yeah, just plant life.
Well, it's.
I mean, it only. I mean,
So those,
not necessarily just plant, but
a lot of
like
it is.
it's more so it's gonna have started enough fauna to have like accreted shit and bones.
Yeah, and like like a peat eventually turns into a type of coal, and then it can press down later, and then like the black blood of the earth comes juicing out of it, and then pools. Well, I feel like those things might have been ancient forests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a dried up seabed might have turned into some oil at some point because it turned into a forest and had like the right conditions, or a swamp. I know that swamps are like the big supplier of titanium. And so they've got to dredge like untold amounts of swamp to make an airplane. It's like it's not cheap. I'm sure there are other ways to get titanium, but it's always kind of incredible, like, to think about where certain materials actually come from. Like,
yeah, it's like I think Kazakhstan is one of the biggest producers of uranium. Like it's
fucking, who is it? I think Mali has been identified as a giant or a new source for lithium.
Yep.
So they're gonna give Norway a run for their money on the lithium game. There's probably a mountain of lithium in freaking North Korea.
I think that's one of the.
So like,
there's a shitload of different minerals in North Korea. I know it was like it wasn't just precious metals. It was like oil was one of them. Fucking like I think some diamond. I forget, but yeah.
I understand that there's a geological process that produces big veins of gold and diamonds, but anytime that there's some kind of concentration of a lot of things that are associated with civilization, it's got to be considered that there might have been something there that is so old that and industrial societies aren't designed for longevity. They're designed to be maintained while they're being used and then dismantled when they're no longer in use. And so we really should only see traces of the industrial societies. But a city, if there was some kind of like really catastrophic event where people just left, or because it's not sustainable, then, or they congregate and left the planet maybe. Do we really?
Because that's like, isn't that what the La Brea tar pits? Not from a city, but it's like a bunch of animals, right?
Yeah.
Or well, because I always forget if it's like the animals die. If the animals died,
I think it's like a combination of that. I think
that's what,
it's like during one of the early extinctions, like a bunch of animals died there, and then became a tar pit. Yeah. And then the next time around, a bunch of animals died in that area. They all just ended up dying because of tar.
Yeah, I'm like, I hope I don't miss.
And then through some great warming period, or through because of increased volcanic activity and impacts from asteroids stirring up shit, there is temperature heats up and it starts bubbling up even more and becomes more active because it's not just being heated up from below, but the air is sustaining a higher average temperature for the tar pit. And I'm sure there are more tar pits around.
Yeah.
There are a lot of.
This is just a famous one.
Yeah, there are a lot of really crazy like petroleum kind of, like just fossil fuel related features on Earth. There's like a small like mountain range, I think, that's like got veins of coal that are on fire.
Oh yeah.
Like at
Yeah.
night, it like smolders and and then I think in like I think it's in Iran. There's like a pit that's like got a natural gas well, and it just burns all the time.
There's a couple of those.
Yeah.
Like I think I just recently read an article about
But I think the one in Iran is the one where the genie story comes from, where people go there and they think that they're like wishing for stuff and see a genie, but really they're just huffing gas. And,
that's hilarious. Oh, there was another one that was like, I think it was also Iran, where it was a spring and there was a gas leak in the bottom, and people were, and they thought they were calling it the portal to Underworld, or like the door to Underworld or whatever, and they would go and hail the gas, and people would like have visions, and some of them would die. It was like a carbon monoxide leak or something.
I bet all of those oracles that lived in caves were just huffing gas.
Probably.
And, like,
yeah,
having vivid drug hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
sitting on top of a methane.
Or eating, like, moldy bread and hallucinating from that. All these things that if we'd have just had like better science, we might not have formed all the mythology.
Yeah. Well, I went to Salem, and it seems like there was only like 16 people that were actually
bewitched.
Well, prosecuted.
Oh.
As far if I remember correctly, which when you think of the Salem witch trials, I mean, 16 people is still a lot. But the way that it's like romanticized in popular culture, you would think it lasted like for a decade or some shit.
I always got a kick out of the way Monty Python made fun of witches. It was like they would they're like, throw her tie her to a chair, throw her in a lake. If she floats, she's a witch. If she sinks, she's a witch. Because it was about if because they thought she would float, and they said, well, let's see, because a duck floats, and they tried to weigh her against a duck, and the duck weighed more than her or something.
I think, yeah.
I think that was more of like a medieval witch they were trying to kill, but it's a reflection of or a satirization of the whole idea of believing somebody's a witch like that.
Yeah.
Like they're conjuring shit up over their cauldron. No, they were just making drugs and getting fucked up. And the same thing with oracles. They're just hallucinating from their whatever they were ingesting.
Yeah.
Some rotting food that made them hallucinate.
Yeah.
Their bread was sitting out and a cow farted on it and laced it with spores, and that's what they're hallucinating from.
Well, I'm always... It's weird. Once you have a shared hallucination, that becomes a whole different thing, though.
Yeah.
Because that's when you're like, okay, what actually is going on here? Is this something that is a whole different realm that now our brains are capable of seeing, or is it just perfectly tuned drug that has the exact same effect?
Yeah.
Because that's where I've had hallucinations from yoga, which then I read about them, and other people had the same type of hallucination, which is where that's when I'm like, that had nothing to do with drugs, like, but it only happened. Kundalini yoga is supposed to induce hallucinations in some people, or some instances, not some people. It's like,
isn't it like unlocking one of your, like your mind chakra or something like that? And the goal, like, you align it all, and then you can, like, I'm screwing it up. I know I'm screwing it up. The last time I read it, like yoga was a long time ago.
That's the thing. Yeah, I'm not like a huge practitioner or anything like that, so I'm not gonna pretend I know like the specifics of like which chakra is supposed to open or whatever. But as based on my experience, I would assume it's the navel, or the cinnabar field, which are close.
I don't know.
But that's where it's basically like your pelvic floor. Which is like not the same as your stomach.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where, again, like those things are something that there's a lexicon to them that obviously represents blood flow, and then people assume has some mystical element to it. But that's kind of where, once I start having the like shared common hallucination, that's when you're like, what's actually happening there? Because it's like, whether it's from yoga or LSD or mushrooms or peyote or whatever, if people see the same thing, it doesn't necessarily have to be at the same time. If they see it and didn't tell each other about it when their reports happen, you know what I mean? If somebody sees something, writes it down or reports it, and then somebody else sees something and writes it down and reports it, and then these two things match up, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's real, but what does it mean? You know, like, that's to me, there's something in that hallucination, mainly because obviously our experience of reality is an abstract, arbitrary accumulation of experiences anyway. Like, our experience of linear time is not how we actually perceive it. Like, a lot of our time is based on jumping back or a lot of our experience is based on jumping back and forth in thought and time.
Because we can't actually do two things at once.
Right. So if everyone actually lived in the moment, linear time, you would never actually have the capacity to plan. So that's kind of where you're like, you don't think about it, but you're constantly like,
because the
jumping
exchange
back and forth.
is mostly transparent.
Yeah.
Until you get locked in thought.
Yeah.
And some people lock themselves in thought.
Which, you know, that then becomes obviously not living in the physical present.
Yeah. I read that that's like it has to do with how we alter the subjective reality of people that we interact with, and that basically existence is subjective, and it's not until we interact with other people that our subjective realities not only come into question, but also start to change. And so, like, what I see in this room and what you see in this room are probably very similar. They might actually not be the same thing, but they might be very similar. They probably are similar. But even if they're not,
well, if you throw a colorblind person in that equation, and shit gets different.
I think even then, we might see even if we saw something different. If I pointed it at an object and said, "This is a thing," you would identify it as the same thing, because we have a common language.
Right.